He stood beneath a fractured dawn, the air heavy with dust and discipline. Captain Elias Ward, anchor, the last quiet voice of an empire that no longer believed in its own words. Georgia was burning behind him, cities folded in smoke, yet his eyes never wavered. Orders were orders. The mission: extract NATO assets before Pax Armata reached the capital. Simple, clean, unfeeling. But nothing in war is ever clean. He moved through the ruins like a man walking through the pages of an unfinished prayer. Every command was muscle memory now, every breath a ritual carved by repetition. He didn't think about the men he'd lost, or the ones who followed him still. Not yet. In his mind, loyalty was the only truth left, the one currency not yet corrupted. So he clung to it, as if faith could still make sense of the noise. Dagger 13 waited for his word, a silent brotherhood under flickering sky drones. They called him Anchor because he never drifted, never broke, never questioned. To them, he was certainty wrapped in flesh. To himself, he was a ghost that hadn't realized it yet. He led them through alleys where children's toys melted into concrete, where the past still screamed beneath the rubble. The extraction zone was close, too close to think. When they reached the perimeter, the comms cracked with distant authority. Cold, rehearsed, mechanical. Stand by. Delay extraction. Prioritize the convoy. Ward didn't flinch. He'd heard those voices before. Faceless voices that always said, wait. Every second of waiting cost blood. Every delay became another ghost in his cathedral. But obedience was survival. Doubt was a luxury. The rotor blades cut through the silence as the sun rose like a warning. Ward looked at his men, sweat, fear, trust, all bound by his word. In that single heartbeat before the next order, he believed loyalty could still save them. He was wrong, and the world was about to remind him why. The day broke open like shrapnel. Smoke curled from the east as Pax Armata drones swept over the ruins, silent predators gliding on light. Ward's visor reflected their path, his pulse steady, his faith fragile. The convoy they were ordered to protect was gone, swallowed by chaos. But command still demanded patience, obedience, containment. He led Dagger 13 into a gutted church, the stained glass shattered, sunlight bleeding through broken saints. They waited there, surrounded by echoes of hymns and dust. In that hollow silence, Ward felt the world tilt, as if the ground itself questioned him. He could hear the distant screams, the gunfire, the unspoken truth buried beneath every briefing. Orders aren't answers, they're excuses with timing. His second-in-command, Reyes, watched him through the dim light, eyes asking what mouths dared not. Ward didn't respond. He couldn't. Leadership, he'd learned, was the art of pretending certainty when all faith is gone. He replayed the last transmission in his head. Stand by. The two words that built graves. Outside, the city fell apart, one silence at a time. They received new intel. Civilians fleeing through Sector 9, intercepted by Pax patrols. Command labeled it collateral risk. Ward labeled it unacceptable. He radioed for permission to intervene. The response came minutes later, colder than steel. Negative. Maintain position. The line between duty and guilt began to blur. When the first explosion hit, the windows shook with light. He felt it in his bones, the ache of loyalty twisting into something darker. Reyes turned to him, waiting for the order that would define them both. Ward hesitated only once, long enough to feel the weight of every life he'd failed to save. Then he spoke. Move out. Loyalty had just taken its first step toward rebellion. They moved through the ruins like shadows learning to breathe again. Every corner, every echo, every flicker of light became a test of faith. Ward led from the front, his voice calm, his silence heavier than the rifles they carried. Civilians huddled in collapsed subways, their eyes wide with disbelief that rescue had arrived at all. To them, Dagger 13 were saviors. To command, they were ghosts off mission. Reyes covered the flank, his breath steady but his doubt loud enough to hear. He'd fought beside Ward for 7 years, long enough to know when a man's belief starts to crack. Each saved life was another mark against their record, another crime written in silence. Ward didn't care. For the first time in months, his orders came from somewhere real, conscience, not command. And yet, the guilt of disobedience clung to him like smoke. By nightfall, The team had secured 30 civilians and one truth. The Pax Armada wasn't fighting for territory. They were cleansing, erasing entire sectors marked as compromised. Ward stared at the ruins through his scope, watching soldiers with no flag execute policy like faith. He whispered to himself, not prayer, not hope, just a question. Who decides what deserves to live? No answer came. Only the distant hum of drones circling like vultures. Then came the broadcast. Command's voice, sharp, unyielding, absolute. Dagger 13, return to coordinates Bravo 2 immediately. This is a direct order. Ward froze. The words carved into him like old scars reopening. Reyes watched his captain's hands tremble for the first time. Obedience would mean abandoning the people they'd just saved. Ward turned off his comm. The static lingered for a moment, then died. That silence was the moment his loyalty broke its first chain. For the first time, he didn't just follow orders. He chose who he would protect. The city was bleeding out beneath a gray sky. Smoke rose from the ruins like the breath of something ancient dying slow. Ward and Dagger 13 moved through streets where the walls whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Every step away from command felt heavier, yet clearer, as if the fog of war had thinned just enough for him to see his reflection in it. For the first time in years, he was not serving anyone. He was acting. They found a Pax Armada checkpoint burning in the square. Civilians chained to trucks, marked for relocation. Reyes' jaw clenched. Ward didn't wait for words. A single motion of his hand, and Dagger 13 became a storm. Gunfire roared. Quick, surgical, final. When the silence returned, so did the weight. The civilians didn't cheer. They just stared, too used to being saved too late. Ward gathered them under the collapsed bridge, offering rations, water, a promise he couldn't keep. He wanted to tell them why he came. But truth had become a language soldiers no longer spoke. In his eyes, they saw both the savior and the weapon. Reyes noticed it too, the flicker of something breaking behind that disciplined calm. The more Ward saved, the more he lost of himself. Night fell again, and with it came the message he'd been avoiding. Encrypted, high priority, from command. Return immediately. Investigation pending. Stand down, Captain Ward. He replayed it 5 times. Each time, the words sounded emptier. Reyes asked, "What now?" Ward didn't answer. He just stared at the horizon, a dark line cutting through the world like a wound. He knew what came next. Disobedience had a cost, and in war, debts were always paid in blood. But as he looked back at the faces he'd saved, the fragile proof that humanity still flickered somewhere, he understood something dangerous. Loyalty without conscience was obedience to nothing, and he was done being nothing. The storm came without warning. Metal rain, electric thunder, the air alive with fire. Dagger 13 had been marked rogue. Ward knew it before the first shell hit. He'd seen the pattern too many times. When loyalty falters, command rewrites the narrative. Now, they were the threat. Reyes shouted coordinates, voice cracking through the static. The squad scattered through the ruins, pinned between Pax Armada patrols and their own brothers in arms. Every bullet that tore the concrete reminded Ward of what he'd chosen. This was the cost of faith, not in command, but in conscience. Faith that truth could exist without a flag. They found shelter in a collapsed metro line, the ground trembling with distant explosions. Reyes patched the wounded while Ward checked the uplink feed, watching their names appear on the wanted list. Dagger 13, presumed compromised. Neutralize on sight. Ward didn't flinch. He'd expected it, but inside, something in him began to rot. The structure he'd defended all his life was now hunting him like an infection. Hours passed. The tunnel filled with whispers and dust. Reyes finally broke the silence. "We did the right thing, didn't we?" Ward looked at him, his expression unreadable, his voice calm but hollow. "We followed the wrong gods for too long." He didn't say more. There was nothing left to justify. When dawn came, the earth shook. A Pax drone spotted their heat signatures, unleashing a cascade of light and sound. Reyes ran into the blast radius to divert the strike, his radio still transmitting Ward's last command. "Fall back." The ground swallowed the sound. The comm went dead. Ward screamed his name into static. Only silence answered. Reyes was gone. The mission succeeded. The man didn't. Smoke still hung where Reyes had stood. Ward's ears rang with the memory, that hollow thunder that never really fades. He searched through debris until the sun rose, until his hands were black with ash that wasn't his own. All he found was Reyes's dog tag, half melted, the name barely visible. The war had taken another voice, but this one wouldn't stay quiet. The survivors of Dagger 13 gathered in silence, their faces carved from disbelief. No one asked what happened. They saw it in Ward's eyes. He didn't speak, didn't pray, just stared at the smoke until it became a wall between him and everything human. In that moment, his duty didn't feel noble. It felt like gravity, cruel, relentless, and impossible to escape. Every soldier learns to carry loss, but Ward was starting to drown in it. When command re-established contact, the voice was colder than usual. Report mission success. Await new orders. No acknowledgement, no name, no mention of Reyes. Ward realized the system didn't mourn. It just recalculated. And somewhere in the math, his friend's life had been reduced to acceptable loss. That night, Ward sat alone beside the ruins, the dog tag turning between his fingers like a coin that wouldn't land. He could still hear Reyes laughing, a sound too alive for this world. He thought of all the promises they'd made in deserts, in jungles, in blood. Loyalty, they said, was their shield. Now, it felt more like a knife turned inward. When dawn returned, Ward burned the orders he'd received. The flame was small, almost reluctant, like even fire hesitated to touch that kind of truth. He whispered to the ashes, not for forgiveness, but for permission to keep walking. The world gave him none, only the wind, carrying the echo of a name that would never answer back. Gibraltar. The sea stretched beneath the cliffs like a wound that refused to close. Ward sat alone in an abandoned outpost, the sound of waves merging with the hum of dead radios. He wrote mission reports by candlelight, words he didn't believe in, words meant for ghosts. Each sentence was a ritual of denial, a way to keep Reyes alive between the lines. The candle's flame trembled as the wind whispered through broken windows. Ward could still hear the calm static at night, like Reyes calling from somewhere he couldn't reach. He replayed recordings of old missions, the laughter before the storm, the quiet jokes that kept them human. Now every frequency sounded haunted. Even silence had a voice. He sent the reports up the chain anyway. Precise, detached, obedient. To command, Captain Ward was still a loyal instrument, but the reports hid something beneath the surface. Patterns, questions, doubts woven like code. He wasn't disobeying anymore. He was listening to the space between orders, to the truth no one dared to speak. Outside, the world pretended to rebuild. New uniforms, new insignias, same wars. Pax Armada's banners rippled in the distance, promising peace through control. Ward watched them through his scope, saw his own reflection staring back, not as soldier, but as relic. The battlefield had evolved. Humanity hadn't. The candle finally died, smoke curling like a spirit leaving the room. Ward sat in the dark, surrounded by static and memory. He whispered a single line into his recorder, voice steady but hollow. Loyalty is the last lie I still believe. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the next order was already waiting. Morning came like an interrogation light, cold, unmerciful, absolute. Ward stood on the ridge overlooking Gibraltar's battered harbor, watching the ships move like chess pieces across gray water. Every flag looked the same from a distance, every emblem painted with the same promise, a peace through control. He had once saluted those flags. Now he just counted how many bodies they needed to stay upright. The world didn't need heroes anymore. It needed men willing to disappear. The new orders came encrypted through a dead channel. Reintegration request. Dagger 13 was being reinstated. Ward stared at the message, reading it twice, knowing what it meant. Command wasn't forgiving him. It was absorbing him back, turning rebellion into protocol. That's how systems survive. They recycle disobedience into myth. He met what remained of Dagger 13 at the docks. Fewer men, older eyes, loyalty without direction. They looked at him the way soldiers look at a ghost, unsure whether to salute or bury him. Ward didn't speak about Reyes. He didn't need to. The silence between them already did. They were bound by duty, but haunted by choice. And in that fragile balance, obedience began to rot from the inside. When Pax Armada's patrol passed near the harbor, Ward's team watched them quietly. Same equipment, same training, same language. Only the logos were different. It struck him then. They weren't fighting enemies. They were fighting reflections. The war had become a mirror, and every side was learning to hate its own face. That night, Ward recorded another message into the static. Not to command, not to anyone who could respond. Just into the void, where truth might echo without judgment. If we're all ghosts now, he said, then tell me, who's left to haunt? The tape clicked off, but the question stayed. The briefing room smelled of metal and memory. Screens flickered with data Ward didn't trust. Coordinates, heat signatures, lies dressed as intelligence. He stood at the center table, surrounded by men who once called him brother. Now they called him sir again, as if the word could rebuild what obedience had burned. But Ward knew the truth. You can't resurrect loyalty. You can only rename it. Their next mission was clear. Intercept Pax Armada movements through the strait. Yet the footage told a different story. Ward saw familiar formations, identical maneuvers, identical voices. These weren't foreign mercenaries. They were former NATO soldiers, men trained in the same doctrine, reciting the same prayers he still whispered before pulling the trigger. The realization cut deeper than any wound. The enemy wasn't across the sea. It was the reflection in his own visor. He watched a clip of a captured Pax operative removing his helmet. The face beneath it was young, tired, American. Ward felt something twist inside. Guilt, recognition, the ache of killing a version of himself. Reyes had once told him, every war ends when both sides forget why they started. Now Ward understood. The flags, the anthems, the politics, all camouflage. They weren't fighting for nations anymore. They were fighting to justify what they'd already done. The moral lines had melted, leaving only survival painted in shades of gray. He wondered if God still watched wars like these, or if even he had looked away. When the briefing ended, Ward didn't dismiss the room. He simply turned off the projector and let the darkness settle. For a long time, no one moved. Then he spoke, low, almost to himself. Every side claims to be right, but every side kills the same. No one argued. No one dared, because deep down, they all saw it too. The mirror they couldn't stop aiming at. The air in the barracks was thick, not with smoke, but with what no one dared to say. Ward sat at the edge of his bunk, uniform stripped down to fatigue and scars. Around him, Dagger 13 lingered in uneasy quiet, pretending to clean weapons that no longer had a purpose. They had fought together, bled together, buried their dead in the same dirt. Now they couldn't even look each other in the eyes. Reyes's absence was a hole they all stepped around, careful not to fall through. Every time someone said his name, the room seemed to lose oxygen. Ward carried it in silence, wearing it like armor he couldn't remove. He saw the tension rising, the question forming in every soldier's stare. Are we still the good ones? No one asked it out loud. Some truths kill faster than bullets. At night, the sea outside Gibraltar echoed like distant artillery. Ward would stand by the window, listening to the rhythm, counting the seconds between waves. It reminded him of breathing, of heartbeat, of control. But control had become an illusion. Even his reflection flinched now when he looked too long. He started to wonder if loyalty and cowardice shared the same face. One evening, Corporal Hale finally broke. He threw his rifle onto the table, voice shaking with fury and grief. Tell us it still means something, Captain. Tell us why we're here. Ward didn't answer immediately. He could have quoted the handbook, the creed, the code. Instead, he whispered, because if it doesn't, then Reyes died for nothing. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was surrender. Each man turned away, lost in his own private battlefield. Ward sat alone, staring at the rifle Hale had thrown. He realized it wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a question, and every time he picked it up, he lied a little more to himself. The message came at dawn, cold, precise, unsigned. Operation Purity. Target, Refugee Stronghold, Gibraltar Sector 9. Confirm and execute. Ward read it twice. The words didn't feel like language. They felt like chains tightening around his throat. He knew that sector. He'd been there. Families, children, civilians with nowhere left to run. Dagger 13 assembled in silence, helmets reflecting the pale morning light. Ward could see the hesitation in their movements, the weight of conscience disguised as readiness. They'd been taught that orders were sacred, that hesitation killed faster than bullets. But today, hesitation was the only thing keeping them human. He could almost hear Reyes whispering, "Don't let them turn us into ghosts." He briefed the team without looking them in the eyes. Standard assault pattern, minimal engagement, no questions. The words left his mouth automatically, a ritual he'd stopped believing in. Inside, every syllable burned. He was leading them into a sin dressed as strategy. When the gunships lifted off, Gibraltar was quiet, too trusting. Ward watched the stronghold shrink beneath them, a cluster of lights in the valley. Not a threat, just survival made visible. Command's voice echoed through the comms. "Confirm target lock." His hand hovered over the trigger switch. It trembled once. He thought of Reyes, of loyalty, of the line between obedience and surrender. Then he turned off his comm and spoke to his men. "New objective. We're not burning civilians. We're burning orders." The crew stared at him, caught between terror and relief. And just like that, Dagger 13 fell from the chain, free for the first time. The gunships turned away from the target, their shadows gliding over the valley like wings refusing to strike. Ward sat in the cockpit, eyes fixed on the burning horizon, heartbeat syncing with the hum of the engines. For a moment, he felt weightless. No orders, no authority, just the terrifying clarity of choice. But freedom, he learned, doesn't come without pursuit. Command's silence didn't mean mercy. It meant they were coming. Within hours, the transmission hit every channel. Captain Elias Ward, Dagger 13, dereliction of duty, engage and detain, dead or alive. The voice belonged to a man Ward once saluted. Now it hunted him with the precision of a machine. Betrayal, he thought, was just loyalty wearing its true face. The squad went to ground in the ruins outside Gibraltar, moving through tunnels carved by older wars. Hale cursed under his breath, the others too afraid to speak. They were ghosts again, but this time, it wasn't a code name. It was a sentence. Ward stayed at the rear, scanning the dark, feeling the weight of every step Reyes never took. Each breath tasted of iron and regret. That night, rain poured through the cracks in the ceiling, soaking their rifles and their faith alike. Hale asked what came next, voice shaking with the question of every soldier who's run out of lies. Ward didn't look up. "Next," he said, "we remember who we were before they told us who to be." He didn't know if that was truth or madness, but it was the only prayer he had left. And for once, no one corrected him. By morning, the world had labeled them traitors, their names erased from the records, their signals jammed, their history rewritten. Yet as the first light broke through the storm, Ward realized something simple and devastating. You can lose your rank, you can lose your country, but once you lose your silence and they can never own you again. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt drowned. Ward sat beneath the fractured pillars of an abandoned comm tower, staring at the faint glow of an intercepted signal. It wasn't random. It was a trace. A voice buried under encryption, familiar in cadence, impossible to mistake. The origin read, Pax Armada, Central Command. The voice belonged to Colonel Adrian Locke, Ward's former commanding officer. Locke, the architect of Dagger 13, the man who built their loyalty molecule by molecule until it became the only language they knew. And now, he was the one orchestrating Pax Armada's campaign, the same man they were sent to destroy. Ward felt his pulse slow to a quiet rage, the kind that doesn't shout, only waits. He replayed the message. Locke spoke with the same calm authority as before. No anger, no guilt. War isn't moral, Elias. It's maintenance. The world breaks. We rebuild it stronger. You taught them loyalty. I taught them purpose. Ward's jaw tightened. The words weren't just command, they were confession. And somewhere deep within that voice, he heard the death of every illusion he'd ever served. He gathered the squad that night, rainwater dripping from the cracks above. He told them what he'd found, who Locke had become, what Dagger 13 had really been built for. Hale looked like he wanted to vomit. The others stared at the dirt, each realizing their loyalty had been designed, not earned. Ward didn't sugarcoat it. We were his experiment, he said. And now, his mistake. It wasn't a revelation. It was a requiem. By dawn, they had a new mission. No flags, no insignias, no chain of command. They would find Locke, end him, end the cycle, not for vengeance, but for the silence that came after. Ward looked at Reyes's dog tag, still hanging from his wrist. The name burned half away. He whispered, "For him, and for all the ghosts he made of us." They left Gibraltar under the cover of a storm, the ocean at their backs, the world in pursuit. Dagger 13 was no longer a squad. They were fragments of conscience marching through the carcass of a forgotten war. Ward led in silence, his footsteps steady, his mind sharpening into something beyond fear. Every mile carried them deeper into Pax Armada's territory, deeper into the architecture of lies they'd once defended. Loyalty had become their compass, but now it pointed toward retribution. They moved through towns stripped of flags, through landscapes where nations had traded names like currency. Children played near burned-out tanks, learning to mistake silence for peace. Ward watched them and felt the sickness of recognition. This was the inheritance of obedience. The world was no longer divided by sides, only by who still had something left to lose. And in that measure, Ward realized they had already been freed. Satellite feeds flickered on their stolen tablets. Locke's movements traced across Europe like a pulse of machinery. Every broadcast, every strategic shift carried his fingerprints. He wasn't hiding. He wanted Ward to find him, the teacher awaiting his final pupil, to prove one last lesson, that morality doesn't survive contact with command. Ward smiled without warmth. Then we'll see whose faith burns faster. The closer they came to Pax's headquarters, the more the world began to unravel. Entire divisions defected, mercenaries switching sides like tides in a poisoned sea. Ward walked through it like a ghost through mirrors. No allegiance, no hesitation. To the soldiers who saw him, he was myth. To those who knew him, he was a warning. Anchor had become untethered. When night fell, they camped beneath a collapsed viaduct, the stars dim through the chemical haze. Hale cleaned his rifle in silence, the others pretending to sleep. Ward wrote a single sentence in his logbook. Not for command, not for history, but for whoever found the ruins. We are what loyalty forgets when it runs out of orders. He closed the book and looked east. Locke was waiting. They reached the fortress at dawn, a monolith of steel and mirrored glass rising from the bones of the old world. Pax Armada's central command, the birthplace of obedience. Ward stood at the edge of the blast zone, rain cutting through smoke, his breath steady, his pulse a drumbeat of purpose. Locke was inside, the architect of ghosts, the man who taught him that loyalty was the closest thing to God left on earth. Dagger 13 breached the outer perimeter in silence. No glory, no vengeance, just inevitability. Every shot fired was history correcting itself. Every fallen soldier was a page erased. Ward led with precision, his movement stripped of anger. Only clarity remained. The halls echoed with the same voices that once commanded him. Now, they screamed his name in fear. He reached the control chamber, glass walls overlooking the dying world outside. Locke stood waiting, calm, composed, unarmed. "Elias," he said, as if addressing a student, "you think you've broken the chain? You've only forged your own." Ward leveled his rifle. "You taught me loyalty," he said. "Now I'll show you what it costs." But Locke didn't move. He gestured toward the screens. Live feeds from the battlefield, from cities burning under Pax's doctrine. "You kill me," Locke said, "and nothing changes. The machine survives. It just needs a martyr to blame." Ward hesitated. His finger trembled on the trigger. And then, for the first time, he smiled. He dropped the rifle and pulled the transmitter from his vest, the one connected to Pax's broadcast array. Every word, every face, every lie went live to the world. He spoke into the static, voice low, unwavering. We were soldiers, not heroes, not villains, just men following orders that stopped meaning anything. He looked at Locke. Today, the chain breaks. Gunfire erupted below. The fortress began to collapse. Ward pressed the final command, releasing every classified file, every proof of the rot within both armies. Locke lunged forward, but the blast took them both. Fire swallowing glass, light consuming loyalty. As the walls disintegrated, Ward whispered into the roar, "For Reyes, for all of us who forgot why we started." The world burned with new colors that morning, not the orange of war, but the pale, merciless gray of truth. Across every continent, Ward's broadcast played on broken screens, on rooftops, in bunkers where soldiers had forgotten their own reflections. The secrets were no longer secrets. The machine had devoured its mask. Pax Armada fractured overnight. Nations blamed ghosts. Commanders vanished. The chain of command, once sacred, dissolved into static. In the confusion, Dagger 13 disappeared, their signals fading one by one into the silence between wars. Some said they defected. Others said they were buried where Gibraltar meets the sea. Weeks later, footage surfaced. A lone figure walking along the cliffs at dawn. No insignia, no weapon, just the rhythm of a man who had nothing left to obey. Some believed it was Ward. Others said it was a myth born from guilt. But those who had fought beside him, those who had seen what loyalty could destroy, they knew. The man who carried the ghosts had finally laid them down. The world did not heal. It never does. But for the first time, soldiers began to ask why before they pulled the trigger. That was his victory. Quiet, unspoken, contagious. Ward had not saved the world. He had made it remember. And remembrance, he thought, was the first step toward rebellion. They never found his body. Only a single tag washed ashore, its letters half erased by salt and time. A relic of a man who proved that loyalty without conscience is not honor, it's surrender. And that sometimes, the most faithful act is to let go. He was born beneath the banners of order and obedience. He died nameless, faceless, free. Between those two silences lived a truth only soldiers understand, that loyalty, when unexamined, becomes the perfect weapon, and sometimes the only way to serve is to disobey. Now you know his name, Captain Elias Ward, the ghost who taught war how to feel again.